Well, hello, friends. Thank you for joining me on this Tuesday edition of the Daily Connection. We're still in the book of Revelation. I tell you, now is when we're getting into that section and what goes beyond that, where, my goodness, countless books have been written, studies have been undertaken, interpretations have been applied. Do you take this literally? Do you take it figuratively? It really can make your head spin. And I want us to be careful as we go through this, and because in applying too much interpretation, we may bring a meaning to the text that's not there. But by not being, not coming with some interpretation, we might miss some of the meaning that is there. And so, chapter 4, chapter 5, is going to be, somewhat not as interpretive because it's all about the Father and His ultimate reign in eternity, and it's all about the risen Christ and Him being what He said. He said He would be the judge. And so, let's pick up today in chapter 4. I want to start in verses 1 and 2. After this, I looked, and there in heaven was an open door. The first voice that I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I'll show you what must take place after this. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and there was a throne in heaven, and someone was seated on it. The one seated there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian stone. A rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald surrounded the throne. Around the throne were 24 thrones. On the thrones sat 24 elders dressed in white clothes with golden crowns on their heads. So here we see it. John is going to become our tour guide. Now, I use that lightly. I understand. I don't want to make light of the text, but it's kind of like when you go to a popular tourist attraction, and everybody's here and everybody's there. But if you're careful, or you're aware of a certain tour guide who knows the out of the way places, the not so readily so easily visited places, it really enriches the event because you can go where some don't even know to go. You can get a certain view that other people don't even know to get. I remember one year going with a group up to Cleveland to do some work in the Cleveland area with a certain ministry group, and we took a day trip up to Niagara Falls, and we managed to get hooked up with a tour guide there, and he'd been there for such a long time. He's a great guy. He had a phenomenal personality, but he was very knowledgeable about the area because he'd grown up there. And so, yeah, you'd have your certain spots you'd go where everybody would be, but then he had a bus that he would take us to different places, and man, it was spectacular. He'd give us the history of it, some personal stories about it. It was rich. Really made what was already a phenomenal experience with Niagara Falls that much more rich. Well, John's going to kind of be our tour guide. Now, we have a transition in terms of our segment. The first segment we have focuses on the Christ and the appearance of the Christ. The second section, starting in chapter 2 and 3, including chapter 2 and 3, focuses on the church and what was going on in the church. Some call that the church age. Again, that's an interpretive component there as well. Well, here John uses that transitional phrase again, after these things. That's letting us know that, hey, he's beginning another section, and this section will actually start here and take us to the end of the chapter. So here we see the ultimate rule and reign of Christ, starting with John's invitation. It says an open door. He saw an open door, which meant he was welcomed. He was welcomed. It says, the first voice that I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here. Well, who was that? Well, if you go back to chapter 1, the same description is applied to another voice, and that voice is later identified as none other than the risen Christ. So here we have the risen Christ speaking to John, his apostle, inviting him up for a personal tour of heaven. And unlike Paul, who said, hey, I know a guy, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, whether in the spirit or not in the spirit, who went up to the third heaven, Paul wasn't allowed to write about that. Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel was allowed to write about that. But now John is going to give us great detail of many chapters of the whole heavenly vision. Starting with, he says, first of all, he said, I was in the Spirit, and there was a throne in heaven, and one seated on it, and the one seated there had the appearance of a jasper and a carnelian stone. And so let's stop right there. What's going on there? Well, two things. Number one, jasper, many have associated with the idea of a diamond. And of course, a diamond is clear, very crystal clear. And it is to be reflective of all the different colors of light that reflect off of it. And it's pure. It's just the purity of it. And then, of course, the carnelian stone, some say sardis stone. It's fascinating that both of these are the last two stones that are represented in the breastplate of the high priest. One represents Reuben, and the other represents Benjamin. all those in between would be understood. So some say, hey, this is representation of the fullness of who God is and his promise and his covenant promise. And Rich kind of goes along with what he says later on. He says the rainbow was around the throne. Rainbow represented God's faithfulness to his promise. And so it might well be that as he sees the Father, he sees the one who is indeed faithful. Now, some others have noticed that the cornelian stone was also a very red, deep red stone that almost resembled blood. So in one sense, you have the faithfulness of God in the jasper stone. In the other, you have the wrath of God. Both of those are being held in perfect harmony by the covenant promise of God, of how he was going to bring judgment. God is on his throne, and he is surrounded by 24 elders, 24 thrones, 24 elders. There's a thought there that this represents the redeemed. This represents the church. While the number 24 is it's a number of completion because you have 12 plus, and it's also a number of representation. And so here you have the God the Father, the creator of all things, sustainer of all things, redeemer, right in the center, and you have the church represented around him. And clearly John's vision is about that God is about to act according to his prophesied purpose. And that's what I want you to notice. Don't get bogged down in some of the imagery because you'll oftentimes see the word like. There was one like. It looked like. And remember, John, in his human capacity, is doing the best he can to give us some sort of a representation of what he had in this heavenly supernatural vision. And not everything corresponded exactly. He couldn't always say, it looked just like blank. He would have to say it like. So I'm encouraging you, don't get bogged down, especially in 4 and 5, with the imagery he presents us. Instead, hone in on what he's telling us about who God is, who Jesus is, and what's transpiring in and through them. And we'll do more of that tomorrow in chapter 5. So short chapter 4 is short, but really just soak in all of the dynamics that are taking place here. And just in wonder and amazement, know that this will be heaven. That in heaven we will join these who are in constant worship and praise. And what we do now is a warm-up. For one day in glory we will see him and we will worship him fully and completely without any of the inhibitions and any of the hindrances that we have to deal with now. Well, I pray your time in the Word today is worship, because that's what it's intended to be. We get into the Word so the Word gets into us. And when the Word gets into us, transformation comes to our mind and to our life, our attitudes, our actions, so that we're ready to go out in a state, we're ready to go out living sent.